Welcome to Crossroads. Big things are now happening with Venezuela. Former leader Nicolas Maduro is scooped up, brought to the United States. He's now set to stand trial in New York after being captured by U.S. Special Forces. But it's actually not even just limited to Venezuela. Mexican cartels, and maybe even other countries, they could be next on the list. I'll be going to what's happening in today's episode. Also, in other news, the scandal of mass fraud allegedly committed by mostly Somalis in Minnesota is slowly coming to light. And look, after previous investigations found fraud in the medical system and COVID kickbacks, the latest is the daycares. And also, meanwhile, speaking of which, it's now being revealed how your taxes were paying the living costs for illegal aliens, including giving them things that even you could not get, like free college. Now, it's an eventful start of the year. Welcome to 2026. I'll be going to these topics and a lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's get started. All right, first off, the former leader of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. He's now set to stand trial in New York after he was captured by the U.S. military. And now President Donald Trump, guess what he's saying? He's saying he might not stop there. He's saying there's other possible actions against drug trafficking, and he's giving a warning straight to Mexico. He's saying the cartels could be next on the list. This is Trump discussing the potential actions on Fox. Watch.
Well, I want to ask you because from your vice president, J.D. Vance, said that the message is pretty clear. The drug trafficking must stop. So was this operation a message that you're sending to Mexico, to Claudia Sheinbaum, the president there?
Well, it wasn't meant to be, and we're very friendly with her. She's a good woman, but the cartels are running Mexico. She's not running Mexico. The cartels are running Mexico. And we could be politically correct and be nice and say, oh, yes, she is. No, she's very, she's very frightened of the cartels. They're running Mexico. And I've asked her numerous times, would you like us to take out the cartels? No, Mr. President. No, please. So we have to do something because we lost. The real number is 300,000 people, in my opinion. They like to say 100,000. 100,000 is a lot of people, but the real number is 300,000 people. And we lost it to drugs, and they come in through the southern border, mostly the southern border. Plenty come in through Canada, too, by the way, in case you don't know. Yeah. But they come in through the southern border, and something's going to have to be done with Mexico.
Now, look, that's a big deal. Trump has been saying the cartels, they're killing Americans by the hundreds of thousands. The cartels are responsible for, and not even just killings of Americans, but also corruption, also human trafficking, other crimes, damaging the basic stability of the United States. And a lot of this is being run through pseudo-legal programs through most of Latin America. Now, President Donald Trump wanted to go into Mexico in particular. Now, look, Maduro, Venezuela, they were mostly cocaine. A lot of the fentanyl, that's Mexico. And Trump is saying he wants to do something about it. He wants to go into Mexico, take out the cartels. The Mexican president is blocking him from doing it, suggesting this is something will never happen, a violation of Mexican sovereignty. Fair enough. Trump is saying, well, maybe we'll have to do something regardless. We'll see if he does it. But what's interesting is this. You might remember on the campaign trail, what did Trump say he was going to do? Donald Trump said he would basically do everything he's now doing, using special operations forces, raids, targeted attacks, drone strikes, naval blockades, everything to stop the cartels. And he gave a warning to local governments. He said that anybody who tries to block the United States from doing this, anybody who tries to stop him, he will react to that by exposing their ties to the cartels. And that's a big shot over the bow for a lot of Latin America because a lot of their politicians are tied in with the cartels. And now that Maduro's captured, guess what's happening? Reports coming out now saying that he's singing like a songbird and they got documents from him. They're finding all the people he was bribing. And even more than this, aside from just the overall problem of cartels in Mexico, there are also direct ties between the Maduro regime and the Mexican drug trade. Breitbart said this, It says the newly released criminal indictment filed against now arrested Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife and others reveals key details about how they used diplomatic planes to fly drug money from Mexico into Venezuela. Get that. Diplomatic planes, because he was the leader of the country. If you have diplomatic planes, they can't search you. If you have diplomatic bags, they can't look inside it. If you have diplomatic bags and everything else, and you're using them to facilitate drug trade, it means you're not a legitimate government. You're a cartel masquerading as a government. And this was happening. This was happening between Venezuela and Mexico. Now it says here the indictments also show a long-standing trafficking relationship with the Sinaloa cartel in Los Zetas, now called Cartel del Noreste. It notes that federal prosecutors also alleged that in 2007, Maduro's wife, Celia Flores de Maduro, took a hefty bribe to arrange a meeting between top drug traffickers and Venezuela's top drug enforcement agent at the time, Nestor Reverol Torres, drug enforcement agent, maybe enforcing the facilitation of the drug trade in this case. It says as a result of that meeting, it says that Reverol Torres agreed to receive $100,000 per drug shipment and would share a portion of that bribe with Maduro's wife, the indictment alleges. It says in 2006, Nicolas Maduro and his family coordinated the shipment of 5.5 tons of cocaine in a jet that flew from Venezuela to Playa del Carmen in Mexico, the indictment revealed. It notes the drugs had previously been seized by Venezuelan law enforcement and then loaded into the plane by the Venezuelan military. So they seized the drugs from the gangs and then took over the gangs' operation of trafficking drugs themselves, allegedly. It says also, the criminal indictment alleges that between 2003 and 2011, Diosdado Cabela worked with the Colombian cartels. Trump's also talked about actions potentially against Colombia, by the way, including against the president, Petro, in Colombia, but worked with the Colombian cartels and Los Zetas in Mexico to move multi-ton shipments of cocaine through Venezuela into, guess what, Mexican shipping ports. I can tell you, interestingly, based on my own investigations, a lot of the ports in Mexico are run by China. Who knows if they were involved? We know they're supplying the drug cartels and doing the money laundering. But it says this also. The drugs were moved in shipping containers that averaged 5 tons, but at times carried as much as 20 tons of cocaine. The drugs were allegedly protected by Cabello and Venezuela's top military officials, known as the generals. And that raises questions over, well, if there was a, let's say, political connection guarding the operations, to what extent was this just a cartel operation? To what extent was it a government operation with these countries? Now, notes this. Federal prosecutors allege that since 2011, leading up to now, the then leader of the Sinaloa cartel, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, financed several drug laboratories in Colombia. Trump is saying he wants to blow those up, you might remember, right? And it says, and those drugs were then moved into Venezuela, where that country's military protected them before being moved north towards Mexico and eventually reaching the United States. And so it seems that Mexico is getting scooped up into this pretty quickly right now. And look, on that point also, Trump is saying he's not going to stop with, Venezuela. He's now saying they might do similar actions in Mexico, maybe going after the cartels there. Trump is saying they know the home addresses, the locations of all the cartel members. He says they know where every one of them is, meaning they're watching, they're listening, meaning they know where they are, meaning they can pull a Maduro on them, right? They can scoop them up and throw them in the ocean if they want, or they can bomb them, as they also did recently, because they're now designated as terrorists. Mexico is blocking the United States from doing this, and Trump is not very happy about it. But guess what? Trump's also talking now about really possible, let's say, regime change, like we're seeing now in Venezuela. And again, the United States is going to be overseeing now the transition of government. Interesting, right? In Venezuela. Probably not too complicated, not like the Middle East. Why? It's because Maduro stole the election. According to both Trump and the Biden administration, this used to be a bipartisan issue. The media is making a big deal about it right now, trying to paint this as a partisan thing. The Biden administration put a $25 million bounty on Maduro. That was the Biden administration. Joe Biden, his administration, the Democrats, put a $25 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro. Maybe they'll pay it to Trump now, we'll see. On that point, actually, they're giving the money to one of the guys who facilitated this down in Venezuela. And Trump actually raised the money on that too. They had up to $50 million, actually. So again, this was not a partisan issue. This was not a partisan issue. This is bipartisan. The media is telling you otherwise right now. But Trump might not stop here. They're now talking about Cuba and maybe even Colombia, and who knows, maybe to some extent something going on, possibly not against the government in Mexico, but against the cartels. We could watch this expand very quickly. Also, meanwhile, in other news, the scandal of mass fraud allegedly being committed by mostly Somalis in Minnesota is slowly coming to light. And it's getting crazy. Guess what the latest is? All the daycares you might have been hearing about, making even political donations, by the way. I'll be talking about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. The scandal of mass fraud allegedly being committed by mostly Somalis in Minnesota is slowly coming to light. Now, I will add to this, it is the Somalis, but it's not just them. This is turning into a broader issue where basically Trump actually posted about this. He talked about the migrant groups coming into the United States. You're looking at like 80% of them getting social welfare of some kind. On the lower end, about 25% of them getting social welfare. At the mid-range, Mexico, half of them getting social welfare. And it turns out that your tax dollars have been funding not only welfare of just about most of the migrant populations in America, but also there's mass fraud being committed on top. Now, the Somalis are the big focus right now. It's not just them, but we're finding out about how they're doing it. Now, previous investigations talked about fraud in the medical system and COVID kickbacks. The latest is fraud using daycares. And effectively what they're doing, they register a daycare, they get federal money for it, and they don't actually do anything. They take the daycare money and they send it back to Somalia, their own country. People buy Maseratis and sports cars and finance terrorism with it. And also they donate to your local politicians here to affect your elections. This was happening, it turns out, with some of these daycares. It turns out a lot of this was also known for a long time. In fact, for years. New York Post said this. Shocking unearthed video from a 2018 state fraud case shows Minnesota parents dropping their children off at a daycare center and then leaving with the kids moments later, meaning they faked it. Hey kid, pretend you're going to daycare and then come right back. Smile for the cameras, wave, come home. It says this was happening as authorities probe a rampant billion-dollar fraud scheme in Minneapolis. It notes in the surveillance footage dated 2015 and obtained by Fox 9, It says parents are seen signing their kids into the facility so providers could bill the state for full days of care for children who did not actually attend. They were scamming people, in other words. It says on some days, no families would even show up at all because, well, who's keeping tabs, right? Smile for the cameras. The camera's up there. Don't bother going. But it said the daycares would still claim reimbursement from the government, the outlets reported at the time. It notes as well on this, effectively this was already known. This was not only known at the local level, this is not only known by a lot of the media, this was known by the government. This was known by local officials. This was known by whistleblowers, many of whom were silenced. And guess what? There's also archived footage of some of that. This is from 2018. This was when investigations are being done, and Fox 9 Minneapolis St. Paul had it, and they note that Scott Stillman, a whistleblower and former investigator in the Department of Human Services, was warning about all of this. Watch.
Emails obtained by the Fox 9 investigators show the Department of Human Services was warned that it had a massive daycare fraud problem on its hands, that millions of stolen tax dollars were going overseas, and it was likely some of the money was being skimmed by terrorism organizations.
I've never seen anything of this level or scope in my 27-year career as an investigator.
Scott Stillman spent 8 years managing the state's digital forensics lab. That means he mined data from computers and smartphones. When the state started going after daycare centers suspected of fraud, Stillman was directly involved in the investigations. He was so alarmed by what he was finding that in March of 2017, he fired off a series of emails to his supervisors at the Department of Human Services.
We are working on and currently overwhelmed with significant fraud cases involving organized crime, defrauding hundreds of millions of dollars annually in taxpayer monies. Significant amounts of these defrauded dollars are being sent overseas to countries and organizations connected to entities known to fund terrorism.
The state currently has 10 daycare centers under investigation for fraudulent billing of child care services. Each of the suspect centers has received several $1 million in government subsidies. According to public records and government sources, most are owned by Somali immigrants.
Now, look, on some levels, this is just corruption. This is just people scamming the system. On some level, this is people taking American taxpayer dollars and sending it off to their own countries where it was used even for terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. But it actually goes further than that. This was also being used to impact America's elections, using stolen money. It turns out a lot of these daycare centers were also politically active. They were doing donations, massive political donations. The Post-Millennial says this. Now, on one point it says, a Somali candidate for King County Council in Washington State who previously threatened to blow up a school bus full of children and was later arrested for allegedly assaulting parents at a school drop-off received campaign donations from daycare businesses in Minnesota. Meaning, the Minnesota daycare centers were donating to politicians in different states. Now, was this corruption? Was this just normal donations? We don't know. This is all under investigation still, so we don't fully know. But it's getting a lot of attention because guess what? We're finding a lot of problems. Let's put it this way. It says the donations to King County Council candidate Ubax Grandier, who is of a Somali descent, are drawing attention amid a viral investigative report by independent journalist Nick Shirley, who alleges widespread fraud involving Somali-run daycare centers in Minnesota. Now, Nick Shirley went door to door to some of these places, tried recording them, even read some of the findings. And what did they find? They found daycares with no children, Somali-run daycares, and you think you're babysitting kids? There were no kids. Now, this has caused some additional problems for these daycares because now you have a lot of influencers showing up at their doors and harassing them. This is not to say they're all problematic, but some of them, it seems, are pretty dang problematic. The federal government now is withholding the money for all the daycares and all this stuff until investigations, criminal investigations, are actually carried out. and until they find out which ones were legitimate and which ones were fraudulent. Now, notes here, Shirley reported that many of the daycares receiving millions in taxpayer funds appeared to have no students enrolled. It says this after visiting them and finding empty storefronts. In one example, Shirley visited the Quality Learning Center in Minneapolis, a facility reportedly receiving $4 million in public funding. He also found that they couldn't write the name right. It says he found a misspelled sign reading Quality Learning Center. Learning Center. Come lear, kids, not learn. It says it was also a largely empty parking lot and no indication that children were present. There were also videos, by the way, of some of the locals trying to fix the spelling errors on their signs, and 4 men couldn't figure it out. So that's some quality leering they got there. Now, notes as well, Secretary of Labor Lori Chavez de Romero responded to some of the recent findings and she wrote on X, quote, "The massive Minnesota fraud network has abused federal funds across multiple federal agencies thanks to unbelievably miserable leadership," she says, from politicians accusing Governor Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar. She says, thankful for the patriots helping expose this corruption and fraud. On that point, the political element of this is going to get a lot bigger. And why is that? There's what I refer to as the ecosystem of criminality. This is the modus operandi, the way things are in a lot of third world countries. And how does that work? In third world countries, in Somalia, in third world countries in Latin America, if you go to Mexico, if you go to China, how does it work? Well, there's an ecosystem of criminality, which is this. Gangs go in and they work with the government. Gangs go in, they rob, they steal, they pillage, they scam. They then make political donations. The politicians receiving those donations are then able to run, except in China where they can't run because it's a communist country. But politicians basically get bribed. They get bribed. And when they get bribes, just like a business lobbying government, hey, push my issue, the gangs, the cartels, the criminal circles, the scammers do the exact same thing. These are businesses lobbying a local official. And instead of donating to them through legal means, they donate to them through semi-legal means. They launder the money through facilities, they donate it to the campaigns, and the politician does the same exact thing, not accusing these ones of doing it, but typically the way it works in third world countries, the politician does the exact same thing that a legitimate politician or business relationship would do, where they're lobbying. Hey, get elected, we'll donate to you, but we expect you to make policies in favor of us. But when it's a gang, what is that? It means don't investigate us. It means don't prosecute us. It means, hey, light on crime policies. If our guys get arrested, revolving door, let them back out. No cash on bail, defund the police, don't investigate us, block it, call it racist, and make sure nobody shuts us down, and you will get the money. It turns out that some of these fraudulent networks were doing what looks like that in the United States. They were committing fraud, stealing money, and then pushing political issues. And many local governments in this area were doing exactly what happens in third world countries, where they were blocking the investigations. They were blocking, preventing, making sure that nobody got investigated, nobody went to jail, and on the other side of it, whistleblowers were punished. The big question right now is why? Was this legitimate DEI policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion? How dare you go after these poor migrants? Or was this known? Or was this actual corruption? We will find out because it's now being investigated. And I will add one thing. This is not just a Minnesota problem. This is not just Minneapolis. This is across the entire United States. This is not even just the Somalis. This is most different organizations and groups and migrant communities across the United States. You will find similar criminality, similar scams, and similar government actions preventing criminal investigations, arrests, or even whistleblowers all across the United States using almost the exact same model. Get ready for it. We'll see if they investigate it, but this is finally coming to light. Also, meanwhile, it's now being revealed how Americans were paying the living costs of illegal aliens. Not just the 4-star hotels, not just the free food. It was a lot of things, even programs you cannot get. Free health care, even things like free college tuition. And that's now being looked into as well. CBS says this. It says the Trump administration is suing Virginia for giving in-state tuition to illegal immigrants. And further in, there's a quote that says, in direct conflict with federal law, Virginia law permits an alien who is not lawfully present in the United States, meaning they're illegal aliens, to qualify for reduced in-state rates and state-administered financial assistance based on residence within the state, but does not make United States citizens eligible for such benefits without regard to whether the United States citizens are Virginia residents, the lawsuit reads. Meaning, if you're in Virginia, if you are an American citizen, money, taxpayer money meant to put your kids through college was not available to American citizens. It was available to illegal aliens. People violating the laws of this country were getting it. Your kids were not. And it says this, quote, since 2022, Virginia law has allowed unlawful aliens who establish residency in Virginia to benefit from reduced in-state tuition rates while denying that same benefit to U.S. citizens who are not residents of Virginia. So, basically, if you're an American citizen, you've been punished. If you are not an American citizen and you're even violating this country's laws and your introduction to this country is basically just slapping it in the face and saying, give me free handouts, you were getting benefits at the cost of Americans. And look, even beyond that, there are a lot of other issues. This is just one big piece of a very big picture. Other issues being revealed are on how taxpayers were even footing the bill for free housing, rental assistance, and things of that sort. Here's New York Post. It says a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development report found more than $5 billion in taxpayer funds went to questionable rental assistance recipients during the final year of the Biden administration. That's just 1 year. $5 billion in questionable rental assistance from your taxes in 1 year. It says including around 30,000 deceased tenants and thousands of potential non-citizens, the Post can reveal. That's a big deal, by the way. Because aside from creating more competition for housing, aside from driving up the cost of rents, because again, supply and demand, limited supply, increased demand through facilitated mass illegal immigration, you were basically making it so rent costs went through the roof for American citizens, and then they went even further and gave free rent and free housing or reduced rent and other programs, including even federally funded loans to illegal aliens. Now, on this point of what they found here, it says Hood officials said a large concentration of the suspicious payments went to New York, California, and Washington, D.C., with dead recipients getting at least some funds in all 50 states in what federal officials are calling widespread abuse of taxpayers' dollars under the Biden administration. Now, some people might say, well, $5 billion. Don't they find $5 billion in fraud or $5 billion spent on random stuff all the time? Keep in mind, American assistance to like NATO or, let's say the United Nations on some of their food handout programs only amounts to only a few $billion, 10, 15, depending on what program it is. Some countries, their entire GDP is around $5 to $10 billion. The amount of money being stolen, even just by the Somalis, under what's now being discovered, they're saying up to $15 billion. That is greater than the GDP of some entire countries. That is greater than what Americans are giving in assistance to entire countries. The amount of money being stolen is so massive. Some are saying it could amount to a significant portion of American tax dollars, meaning you're paying taxes every year. You're giving more money in taxes than to the entire U.S. defense budget just to pay on interest to debt. People buying up American debt, you're paying them interest. You don't benefit from that. That's not your schools, that's not your roads, that's not your firefighters. You're paying interest on debt. And aside from that, the overspending on this, some are suggesting right now, based on findings coming out, about half of your tax dollars are just going to fraud. About half of your tax dollars are being stolen by people defrauding the United States. So between fraud and crazy interest rates, very little of your tax dollars are actually going to benefit you or your family. Very little of it. Now, on this point, we're talking about what was happening with the free housing programs and rent-subsidized places and other things. It says this, quote, "A massive abuse of taxpayer dollars not only occurred under President Joe Biden's watch, but was effectively incentivized by his administration's failure to implement strong financial controls, resulting in billions of dollars worth of potential improper payments," Hood Secretary Scott Turner said in a statement. Go back to what I said about Minnesota. What was that? The local officials in Minnesota are being accused of fraud. Why? Not because they were engaged in, robbing COVID funds, not because they were engaged in this, but because they created the conditions that allowed fraud to take place. They removed the checks and balances. The argument now coming from Hood Secretary Scott Turner is that similar removal of checks and balances resulting in massive fraud happened across the entire country. You're watching this start. You're watching the investigations of this start. And I'll tell you right now, very soon people are not just going to be talking about the Somalis. They're not just going to be talking about Minnesota and Tim Walz and so on. They're going to be talking about all 50 states. And they're going to be talking about which officials and which local officials were involved in allowing the conditions or creating them that facilitated massive fraud against American citizens. Get ready for it. This is just starting. And that said, Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. It's going to be a wild year. And of course, you have questions, comments, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. All right, first off here, let's see. I hope you all had a good New Year, by the way. See more butts. You're saying, truly, I don't think I've ever been more proud of a president ever in my life. You're talking about Trump snatching up Maduro. You're saying, when I heard that Trump had authorized our military to go into Venezuela and take Maduro and his wife, that is America, baby. Kick butt and take names. You know, the funny thing is, I bet this will help Trump in the polls because all right, what are the big arguments against Trump right now, okay? Trump won the popular vote. Republicans, they're doing okay, right? We'll see what happens for the midterms. A lot of the disenfranchisement among Republicans is not, oh, how could Trump do this? A lot of the disenfranchisement is saying Trump is not doing enough. So while the media is saying Trump's doing this, Trump's doing that, how dare he? The voters are saying, why is he not doing more? That is where the American voter is right now. While what is happening, a lot of the corporate media is framing it as like massive scandal, craziness. For most voters, it's not enough. They actually want more of it. They say, hey, deporting 5 million people or something like that. Hey, good job, but we want more. Deporting, it's like 2 million, right? 2 point something. Great. We want to see about 40 million, not 2.5 million. We want to see about 40, 50 million. That's what the argument from the voter is versus the argument from the media. And on Seymour's point, I'd actually agree right now. If you look at the way that voters reacted to this is like, Team America World Police moment. People are blaring, America, the song. People are blaring that in their heads right now, watching videos and looking at, again, Maduro being dragged off. On that point also, this is not the first time we've seen this. Does anybody, I was young at the time, but maybe some of you remember, Noriega. Who is Noriega? You might remember him as the former leader of Panama. He was abducted by the United States, taken in the exact same way back in, I believe, 89, right? Wasn't that 89? And so this is not the first time America has done this. The difference is America used to enforce, again, what they call the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, the idea of American order throughout all of Latin America and even Canada, actually. This is actually part of America's policy. We have not been enforcing this since the time of Maduro. Since the time of Hugo Chavez. And Maduro was handpicked by Hugo Chavez. There were reports, by the way, that on the way out, for no apparent reason, Trump and his guys decided to blow up the mausoleum of Hugo Chavez. I've seen reports that was probably fake news. They did blow up something on the way out, but they probably did not blow up the remains of Hugo Chavez for good measure. I'll give you a bit more of why this matters, okay? What you just watched happen, what you just watched take place in Venezuela was not about drugs. It was not even just about oil. It was about the Monroe Doctrine. It was about Chinese influence, but mostly I'll say something else. What's coming up very soon? What's the date today? You tell me. What's the date today, all right? What day is tomorrow? Tomorrow is January 6th. What happened 5 years ago on January 6th? President Trump spoke at the Ellipse, and people went and raided the Capitol building. What was Trump's argument at the time? What was the real reason for that? Does anybody remember? Donald Trump said that there was massive evidence of fraud. Now, some would say, well, look, it all went before courts and courts threw it out. The kicker to that is the courts never looked at the evidence. None of the evidence was ever presented in the cases that were thrown out. It's a fake argument used by a lot of, it's not fake, it's a dishonest argument used by a lot of the media. None of the evidence was ever looked at. That's the truth of it. Now, what do you need for the evidence? Which election companies are from Venezuela? You tell me. Which election companies are from Venezuela? Which country's leader, the bust of whom, did Joe Biden place in the Oval Office after taking office? You tell me. I'll tell you right now. Venezuela is the answer. Biden had put up the bust of Hugo Chavez in the Oval Office, actually. And on that point, too, what do you need to install the new government in Venezuela? Let's go back in time. 2018, Nicolas Maduro running for office. He loses the election and then stays in office. What also happened? He was accused of rigging the election. If you now have a government in exile coming in, I believe from like Switzerland or Sweden, I can't remember where, the Venezuelan government in transition being operated right now by the Trump administration, and poor Marco Rubio is wearing another hat right now. Now he's wearing the Supreme Leader of Venezuela hat. He's positioning himself very well for the elections, by the way. I don't know what's going on. Marco Rubio is like, you ever watch like an Eddie Murphy movie, and Eddie Murphy plays like every actor in the movie? Marco Rubio is like the Eddie Murphy of American politics right now. He's like running like half the government. Like it's crazy how many hats that guy's wearing. He's now also kind of the de facto semi-leader of Venezuela for a little bit. But they have a government in transition coming in. On a more serious note, what does that mean? If the Trump administration is now in charge of the transition of government for Venezuela, and they need to prove the illegitimacy of Nicolas Maduro, and they need to get the opposition in place by legitimizing them, what do they have to do? They need to prove that Maduro stole the election. How do they do that? You look at the Venezuelan election system and you delegitimize it. Which companies would that be? You tell me. Get ready for it. Lucy Park, 1899. You're saying the problem with free anything is that people tend to treat the gift as not valuable because they didn't have to work for it. I would agree. Okay, so let me give you some wisdom of how I raised my kid. My daughter turns 16 very soon. It's kind of crazy. When she was a kid, you know how when your kid is like, yeah, you're kids, right? And the kids have arguments over something, and you're like, well, you should share, little kid. You should share. How many of you remember when you were kids and you were forced against your will to share? Did that make you more generous or did it make you more greedy? I remember when I was a kid and I had to share half a pack of fruit snacks with a cousin, and my grandma made me do it and I didn't want to. It made me more greedy. I felt wrong, and I was like, how dare this kid rat on me and make me give her half my fruit snacks? No offense taken right on that. It made me more greedy. I think forced generosity is not generosity. Forced generosity is theft. And forced generosity undermines not only the nature of generosity itself and the incentive to do it, but it also ruins the nature of when you are grateful for what you received. The person is not going to say thank you. They're going to say, ha ha, look at what I made you do and give me half your stuff, right? Anybody who had a sibling growing up knows this to be true, right? Right? Am I wrong on this? Am I wrong? You know it to be true. The way I taught my daughter as a kid is I never forced her to share, but I taught her about the virtue of generosity, that it is nice to share. You don't have to do it, and you should never feel you have to do it, in fact. If you're forced to do it, it's plunder. You're being robbed. If you do it of your own volition, it's because you're a nice person. I would also say on the other half, that when people get something through generosity, it's often met with equal generosity. They say, you helped me, I want to reciprocate this. I want to demonstrate to you that I'm grateful, and through my gratitude, I want to show that I'm making good on this. I'm going to better myself. I'm going to look for a job. I'm going to do things because I know, first of all, that your generosity probably is not going to be forever. And if you're going to help me get on my feet, I plan to get on my feet and start walking because I want to show you that I can do it. I want to show you that your generosity did not go to waste. Generosity in traditional society actually did result in this in the past, as opposed to a welfare state. Welfare states do the opposite. People are not grateful for getting it. When people get welfare, they don't say, wow, thank you, government, for giving me money. Thank you, American taxpayer, for helping me. They say you didn't give me enough money. Why is it that I can't buy all the luxury goods that people with $1 million a year make? Why can't I go and buy a Maserati? Why can't I go buy the latest video game system? Why can't I have all the luxuries enjoyed by the richest when I, as somebody who does not work, and I'm not saying me, but in this case, is being given money as handouts, and I'm being denied access to all these luxuries because there's the haves and the have-nots. It does not result in generosity. It results actually in jealousy and greed. The welfare system does not create generosity. It creates entitlement. And so this is the way that socialist seizing of wealth, it's not generosity, socialist seizing of wealth actually creates institutionalized poverty. And the only way they can create more poverty is by seizing more wealth and redistributing it to the extent eventually that people making the money say, why am I bothering making money when I can go on welfare and do the same thing? It's the failed system, right? And so, yeah, I fully agree with you, Lucy, that free anything does not typically result in gratitude. You have to work for it to appreciate it. It has to have some effort or some kind of incentive to appreciate it. That's just the way that things are, I think. Ashley from California, you're saying, when do taxpayers get a break? I've been wondering the same thing. You're saying, when do taxpayers get justice? When is it time to throw the tea into the harbor? Good question. Yeah. So, okay, so President Donald Trump is saying that leading up now to 2026, you're going to start seeing some pretty good tax returns. We'll see to what extent. The American taxpayer has been thrown under the bus. The American taxpayer is the one who's been kind of shouldering basically everything. The higher bracket of earners don't tend to feel it as much. The lowest bracket of earners don't tend to feel it as much. But the middle bracket, most Americans, middle-income Americans, they tend to live in basically dire straits. They're paycheck to paycheck. The average middle-income American is the one suffering the most. And a lot of them are the ones suffering from, hey, I can't afford rent. A lot of them are the ones suffering who are drowning in medical debts or drowning in student loan debts. And, you know, you could say, hey, you shouldn't have taken it out. How many of you, when you were like 18 years old, knew how like debt traps work or like, you know, predatory interest rates worked? A lot of us didn't, right? You have people basically paying the equivalent of a rent every month, like $1,000 a month, just on interest, not even putting a dent into the actual debt. It's crazy. It's crazy what's been done to people. And so a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people can barely get by. And when you're paying taxes and struggling and grinding like that, and you can hardly survive, and you see a bunch of Somalis come in and just absolutely rob you of your tax dollars, people get mad. I think it's fair now that Americans want deportation. I think it's fair now that people are mad about these things. And I think it's fair now that you could, again, have people demanding, hey, I want to have some money back. Give me my money back. And the way you give money back to hardworking Americans is you stop taking so much from them. You give them more back on taxes. Stop taking so much in taxes if it's not being spent properly. On that point too, if you give money to somebody and they leave your money out and half of it gets stolen, is it on the people who stole it or is it on the people who left it out? If you give money to someone and they set it down on the doorstep and they're saying, gee, I hope nobody steals this money, and you struggled to make that money and someone steals it, to what extent is the person who left it out in the open responsible? It's going to be that exact same issue with the lack of oversight. It's going to be that exact same issue on protocols and rules and laws that prevented the checks and balances that would have stopped this fraud from happening. The systems that allowed fraud to take place are just as much a slap in the face to most Americans as the people who committed the fraud. And so, you know, we'll see how this goes leading into the midterms, but this is going to be a big deal, I think. Jeffrey Wright, 4204, you're saying, my vote is Greenland first, then Cuba, then Mexico in that order. I forgot about Greenland. So Donald Trump seems to be in an interesting mood, okay? Donald Trump woke up maybe on Christmas morning and said, gee, I could sure use a nice Christmas present. And he goes and spins his globe, dances with it like Charlie Chaplin and says, you know, owner of the world or something like that. Which country shall we take today, Pinky? And you know, looks at it, right? And decides, hey, how about Venezuela? They look nice. So you might remember Trump's tweet, or he posted on Truth Social, where he came out and said, Venezuela stole it from us. They stole it from us. They took our oil, we built it for them, and they stole it. And so Trump now is going in there, and what are we doing? We're taking back all the oil fields. Not only that, but for good measure, we're also taking the rare earth mineral mines. So Trump just secured rare earth minerals and oil. And for oil companies, this is a great thing, actually. If the country can be stabilized, it's even better. We'll see how that goes, because we have not had good luck with that in the past, to be totally honest with ourselves. Now, Trump is also saying, you know what, maybe I won't stop there. Maybe we'll look at other countries. He's saying maybe something in Mexico. Marco Rubio really doesn't like the communist leadership in Cuba. Maybe we'll go to Cuba next. They're now talking about maybe going against Petro in Colombia because Petro's freaking out right now and he's moving his military to the border. And the big thing with the Maduro arrest, it turns out they were facilitating a lot of the cocaine trade with Maduro. And so a lot of what was happening in Venezuela actually goes back to Colombia, actually. But they're also talking about Greenland. And so Trump is coming out now and he's talking again about Greenland, that America might take Greenland. And Denmark is saying, well, you can't take the country we rightfully stole. How dare you try to steal what we have rightfully stolen? Because Denmark also kind of took Greenland a long time ago, right? You could argue on how long ago. How dare you try to steal what I have rightfully stolen? Denmark, and to be fair, right? Greenland goes back to like the Viking era and so on like that. And I'm kind of playing with words here. But Denmark, of course, owns Greenland. You're talking about a relatively self-governed region. It can't really survive economically without financial support. Denmark has been paying a lot of money for them. But Trump is saying right now that we need Greenland for defense purposes, for national security purposes, because who's all around the Arctic? It's China and Russia. And if America doesn't move in there, China or Russia or both will. There's a battle for Greenland. Everybody's saying America wants Greenland. Nobody's criticizing the CCP for wanting Greenland. Nobody is criticizing Russia for wanting Greenland. They're only criticizing America for wanting it. The sovereignty of Greenland is already undermined by Russia and China. And why is nobody talking about that? And so Trump is saying, you know what, we need to get it. We need to make this a military base. If you look at the Arctic, the battle for the Arctic, a good chunk of the Arctic region is Greenland. Greenland is the strategic gold mine for the Arctic. And if you want to talk about American national security, the Arctic is the Achilles heel. In the event of a nuclear missile attack, it doesn't go across the Pacific, it goes across the Arctic. In the event of an air raid military incursion, it does not go across the Pacific, it goes across the Arctic. The Arctic is the strategic Achilles heel of the United States, which is why you have China and Russia pushing in there really heavy right now. That's the checkmate. If they can get nuclear weapons up there, that's game over, basically. That's Cuban Missile Crisis level in terms of regional proximity to some areas, not all of it, of course. That is the Achilles heel of the United States. And so on that front, Trump is saying we need Greenland. We can't allow this to happen. And you could say, well, what about Canada? We're looking at Canada too. Trump hasn't talked about it for a while, but Trump wants Canada too. So don't speak too soon. James Dyson, you're saying Maduro is the keystone block of the Jenga tower of the axis of communist powers. Well said. I fully agreed. Maduro is also the Jenga piece balancing on one for effectively who runs Latin America. Hugo Chavez, working with Fidel Castro and working with China, helped facilitate the incursion of the Chinese Communist Party in the One Belt, One Road initiative into all of Latin America. And they also worked to bring in Hezbollah with Iran. They also helped to bring in Russia. And they also helped push out the United States. The rejection of the Monroe Doctrine, working with Cuba, was a Chavez program. That was a Hugo Chavez program. Maduro was handpicked by Chavez. If you pull out Maduro, you pull out the piece that facilitated the entry of China to all of Latin America, and you also pull out the piece that was basically as you put it, the Jenga block. You pull out the tower comes collapsing down to bring back the Monroe Doctrine. And you meant the axis of communist powers. That's also true, mostly in Latin America, because there's the meta narrative here. We're talking about oil, rare earth minerals, good old fashioned, hey, remember when you used to have a country? It's mine now, by the way. Remember how you used to have a country? Wasn't that interesting? It sure is nice that I have your country now. That kind of thing. Aside from that, there's the grand question of who runs Latin America. And I'll tell you right now, it's not the Latin American governments. They're not powerful enough. It's China. America wants to bring that back to the United States. And there's a regional battle right now between America and China. Alongside the reestablishment of the Monroe Doctrine, the Trump administration is now talking about infrastructure deals, stability operations, military actions, actions to kill the cartels. I've said it before, the cartels are not just about drugs. The cartels are about the ecosystem of corruption. You manufacture corruption for political influence. If you want to conquer a country, you manufacture an ecosystem of corruption and then use the corruption to place your guys in power and kill everybody who opposes them. That is what the cartels have been doing in just about every single country in all of Latin America. And whoever controls the cartels controls the governments. That's the way the ecosystem of corruption works. The cartels control the government, foreign governments control the cartels, the CCP runs the show. They facilitate the drug trade, do the infrastructure programs, they control the economies, the CCP controls Latin America. That's the real picture of it. Hugo Chavez, working with Castro, were the ones who facilitated that. Pull out Maduro, you break the whole chain, and you begin the reestablishment of the United States in Latin America. That's why this matters so much. All right, everyone, that said, Happy New Year. Always a lot to talk about. What do you think about this? Do you think I'm on the ball with this, or do you think I'm missing something? Let me know in the chat. On that point, too, for the new year, what do you hope to see me maybe investigate or cover if I were to go on the ground, boots on the ground anywhere? What would you like to see me do? Want to see me go to Venezuela? We're talking about it. Maybe we'll do something else. Maybe something about the Monroe Doctrine. Maybe something right here in the United States. Maybe, let me know what kind of investigations you'd like to see me do this year. Let me know in the chat. I will see you again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And as always, thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.